Though I mostly consider myself a shoujo and josei content creator, I also consider myself a connoisseur of good quality romance series. It's not my fault that the two intertwine more often than not. If you've paid attention to YouTube over the last year or took a look at any of the upcoming anime lists though, you'll notice we're getting a lot less kiss kiss fall in love and a lot more anime based around somebody being teased to the point where it's almost become its own entire subgenre. Well, there's little wrong inherently with a solid shonen or seinen rom-com like Monthly Girls Nozaki-kun or Komi Can't Communicate. The fact these demographics have run roughshod over adaptations the last 5 years hasn't really sat well with me. We can't get a second season of Skip Beat or get an anime with the same budget and care as a weekly Shonen Jump title, but Rent a Girlfriend is somehow getting a third season. You can chalk some of this up to bitterness, which in truth is part of it, but I'm genuinely curious. How have we gotten here? How did a demographic which seemingly had romantic slice-of-life series on lock get pushed aside for its older and younger brothers? What changed in the last 5 years to push the paltry amount of shoujo anime we do get towards light novel or digital adaptations? And how have anime and manga trends over the last decade contributed to these series not sitting right with some that prefer the older style? Why now more than ever do we see people pining for the days of the early 2000s rom-com rather than what gets churned out today with shocking regularity? Well, hopefully I can get to the bottom of this as we explore how shonen and seinen rom-coms took over the anime industry. Much like my Otome Isekai video, in order to look to the present and future, we must first look towards the past. I previously covered in brief the Year 24 group and how they helped revolutionize the way shoujo manga was created in the mid-70s, but even before then, in the mid-50s, we started to see a surge of shoujo manga magazines dedicated to writing stories for women. Obviously, women's magazines had already existed before then, some of which featured manga in them. But it was around this time that dedicated manga-only, or mostly manga magazines started to pick up, with the main focus being on lighthearted, dramatic, or scary stories. The first two of these was Kodansha's Nakayoshi in 1954 and Shueisha's Riban in 1955. Interestingly enough, both magazines are still running to this day, with Riban having close to 400,000 copies in circulation this year alone. As the 50s rolled on, female artists were brought on to start giving a female perspective to these stories that, despite their audience, were written by men. And by the time the 60s had come around, a demand for content in these ever-growing magazines led to an even larger influx of female creators coming in to create their own stories. Besides your lighthearted comedies, romantic tales, or horrific tragedies, one genre that started picking up steam was the romantic comedy. The genre was already huge in the West thanks to Hollywood, and despite trepidation from their male counterparts, female authors pushed for these romantic comedies to be made, and they came with a large amount of success. Magazines like Shoujo Friend and Margaret were thriving thanks to these stories interspersed with your more traditional romance, and even after the Year 24 group rose to prominence in the mid-70s and changed the game, they were still finding success. It's here that we meet the indirect cousin of a lot of shoujo rom-coms, the slice-of-life story, specifically slice-of-life anime. These mostly low-stakes series and films proved to be incredibly successful, with some series like Doraemon and Crayon Shin-chan running for 1,000+ episodes. Studio Ghibli released multiple films in the genre, including Whispers of the Heart and My Neighbors the Yamadas, and throughout the 90s going into the 2000s, the genre only continued to grow, developing subgenre after subgenre, both official and unofficial. While a lot of these adaptations were based on series that ran in Shonen or Seinen magazines, a lot of them focused heavily on female characters in mostly aromantic or offhandedly romantic situations. If you wanted romance, you went for shoujo. If you just wanted cute girls doing cute things, you went for slice of life. Elements would sometimes blend together, especially if a show needed to meet certain episode quotas, but you could easily tell the difference between a show like Skip Beat and a show like K-On! They existed in similar bubbles, but had enough differences that even the most casual viewer could tell the difference between them. Then the anime boom of the mid-2000s started to take off. You see, before 2003, less than 100 shows were being made a year, and even fewer made their way over to the West. That number increased into the mid-100s during the latter half of the decade, but rarely passed the 150 mark, something that's child's play compared to today. That's why so many of those shows that we hold dear from that time period have stuck with us. Less shows were being made, so collectively we all experienced them together and lifted them up in our communities. Especially in shoujo circles, whenever a manga we loved or a romance series was being made, we took note of it and held it close. So many anime were battle shonen, so something that appealed to women like us were special, and it's why we have so much nostalgia for them, especially now that so few are being made. The number of shows only continued to ramp up going into the 2010s, and with that came a mad dash for creators to make new stories in hopes it would get an adaptation. Whether a webcomic, web novel, light novel, or manga, people were trying to find that big commercial success that would set them up for life. In an interview with shoujo magazine Kiss editor Sukumina Yuki, she describes how this can be a double-edged sword. The internet arrived, and the number of places where artists could present their work themselves casually for free has grown. This is a good thing in that there's a wider variety of places to discover new artists, but I also think the number of hurdles to a manga becoming a commercial hit has naturally multiplied as well. I think this is likely an overall market change affecting all genres, not just shoujo manga, but reader standards for what is worth paying money for have become much harsher. That's the thing about creating content. It's not always going to take off the way you hope, especially when so many others are trying to do the same. It's good to have a large company having your back if you're one of those stories in their circulation, but even if you get published and end up in something like a Rebond or Nakayoshi, you're not guaranteed an anime adaptation. Even if you're considered, there's a lot of work, meetings, and planning that going into creating anime. That'll eventually get its own video, but here's a handy chart you can pause to check out. Short version is that a lot of producers, directors, and committee members, who are almost always usually men, try to think of what will make money and then create that. So now we're at the mid-2010s, and hundreds of shows are being produced at an increased rate, and almost doubly we have people trying to create their own works in order to find success. Shueisha and Kodansha are at the top of their game with success after success, and with a digital platform about to drop in 2017, Shueisha is poised to find even more success within the ever-growing digital marketplace. It's around this time that we started to see a concerted push in these Shonen and Seinen magazines towards taking the evergreen slice of life and blending it with the romantic comedy in a more direct sense. Series like this had existed before and found quite a lot of success, but like I had mentioned, usually there was a disconnect. Not anymore. As cynical as this will sound, they had the top of the charts with the new generation of battle shonen, and now they wanted the rest of it. That's when we started to see a lot of these series that have become big in the last 5 years. Rent-A-Girlfriend, Takagi-san, Komi, Nagatoro, Shikimori, Uzuki, Dress Up Darling. The list is long and fruitful and the formula is crystal clear. Awkward boy meets secretly or overtly awkward girl, give them a goal or dream to push towards, and then drip feed until the well is dry. It's a license to print money, and people keep buying them. If you can blur the lines or hire a writer that's a fan of or grew up reading shoujo manga, even better. Within a year of publishing, and sometimes as soon as the first volume drops in the West, an anime is usually announced with tons of fanfare and goes on to be praised by fans of all sorts. Even better, sales of the manga will usually rise after the announcement or airing, and given the slow-paced nature, you can run these shows for 2 to 3 seasons over a 4-year period. It's a process that works, and will continue to work, though there are some cracks in the armor. Despite my tone and my obvious bias towards shoujo and josei, I don't hate shonen and seinen romcoms. Some of the first series I collected as an adult fell into that category. The formula is predictable, but it gets the job done. Much like a McDonald's Big Mac, the quality will vary from project to project, but if something is selling massively worldwide and appeals to an incredibly broad audience, there's gotta be something working, right? Where my praise starts to falter is how modern conveniences and tropes found heavily in shonen series have bled over into these otherwise innocuous experiences, causing a lot of uncomfortability. I'm talking about the gazes, specifically the male gaze. Often misappropriated on TikTok and other platforms, the male and female gaze are an important pair of topics that play very deeply into where we are now as an industry. Other creators have covered this in better detail, and I'll link some of those videos down below, but I'll give a basic bullet point explanation of both, and then explain how the inherent male gaze has hurt a lot of these series. The female gaze, which is the newer of the two concepts, is based around 3 things: the feeling camera, the gazed gaze, and returning the gaze. Simply put, without going into too much detail, if you've ever read or watched a shoujo series, you've seen these concepts in action, prioritizing emotion, empathy, and introspection above all else. Feeling valued as a woman like you genuinely matter, and expressing your feelings in the most detailed ways. Oftentimes it's tell, don't show, but in romance stories or stories with romantic elements, this kind of concept works. Where people tend to go wrong is in treating the female gaze as the opposite gender equivalent of the male gaze. Whereas the male gaze often treats the female subjects as objects of desire to be objectified and lusted over, even if they're the main focus of the story, some online have tried to cross out female, replace it with male, and call it a day. That's not correct. While I can understand why some might think that, since it seems like an easy switch, the female gaze wasn't created as an opposite concept, rather a way to explore agency in female-written stories and verbalize the importance of empathy and want over sexual desire. Hot guys are great, but that's never just been it. I could go long here, and some of these concepts might get their own video at some point, but the biggest issue with a lot of these modern rom-coms is that they are inherently written with a male audience in mind and often shot accordingly in their anime. Some are more egregious offenders than others, but we've seen all of this before. Close-ups of legs, feet, breasts, ass, or lips, panty shots, fetish shots, lollies, drooling faces, lewd jokes, or lewd acts, treating women like prizes that should be put on pedestals and not as people. I'm far from a prude. I own both Dick Fight Island and all of Monster Musume unabashedly, but it's because it's so ingrained in the world of anime and manga that oftentimes people who don't associate themselves with the medium feel weirded out by what they see because of the prevalence of these sort of topics. Even if they hide it or minimize it as best as they can, whenever they rear their ugly head, you're left with either the feeling of, oh well, that's just how anime is nowadays, or maybe I should watch something else. I know for a fact I've covered up my screen a few times watching rom-coms at the gym. Even within this kind of storytelling structure, there's good ways and bad ways of handling this. If you're dead set, if you're determined to argue until you're blue in the face that ecchi and lewd content is an important and integral part of anime, at least do it in a way that makes sense. Having Kazuya have an anatomically incorrect cuck dream resulting in him getting hard while in a pool full of minors is not good and makes no sense. Having your partner and love of your life tease you when you're feeling down by showing a little leg makes more sense. Just inserting random close-ups for no logical reason or forcing people into borderline porn scenarios makes things tiresome. At least make it consensual between the two, or give it a reason to exist. As many issues as Uzuki rightfully has, at least her breasts are part of the joke and used for comedy. It's still mostly annoying, but if you're going for pointless fan service, at least give it a reason for existing. That's why it hurts as much as it does that these kinds of stories keep getting prioritized, greenlit, and pushed out the door so quickly, while more thoughtful romance stories often get pushed aside, forgotten, or given little budget if they are animated. I'm not going to go into full conspiracy theorist here, but when these shows are adapted and look poor or perform poorly compared to their more marketable, more detailed, and bigger budget counterparts, there's a little part of me that wonders if this is on purpose, or at least a somewhat concerted effort. Or maybe I'm just still mad at how Netflix handled Seven Seeds. That's something that's going to stick with me for a long time. For better or worse, mostly worse, these series have become the norm. I understand their appeal and popularity. I understand being in a magazine that gets bigger numbers will often lead to a better chance of being adapted. I understand we live in a world where actual Japanese editors in power are saying women no longer read shoujo and only care about boys love Korean webtoons and shonen despite it being untrue. I understand that these companies see what Disney and other monopolies have done and are trying to take 80 years of dedicated demographics and try to smash them into one homogenized, uninteresting, fan service heavy blob. Or at least cause enough division that people become complacent. I get it, but I don't like it. Shoujo romance and shoujo slice-of-life rom-coms still exist. Some are even getting adaptations in the near future or are being published in the West after a long wait. People still flock to train stations, convenience stores, or bookstores in Japan to pick up these magazines or volumes. It's disappointing that the modern rom-com anime relies so heavily on the Shonen and Seinen demographic. The tropes bolstered by the male gaze and corporate greed don't help either. A lot of them are passable, and some of them are even good, great even, but they don't feel the same. They lack the heart, the empathy, the interpersonal relationships that made series like Kamisama Kiss, Ouran, Skip Beat, and so many others special. They feel shiny but disposable, like the flowers you get on a date that you end up throwing away a week or two later. Maybe there will be a shift down the line, and we'll start to get more of what shoujo fans have been craving for and asking for so long. I'm a cynical woman, but not entirely hopeless. I'd love to see that happen again someday. Not for nostalgia's sake, but for the sake of good quality storytelling. Shoujo fans are out there in large numbers, and all we want to do is kiss, fall in love once again, just like we did all those years ago. Hey everybody, Kenzie here. So, I've been pretty sick the last week and a half, almost 2 weeks. That's why this video is coming out on a Sunday instead of a Saturday. But I still wanted to get something out, and in return, the video I was actually going to do, my long-form essay on the history of boys' love and girls' love, well, that ended up having to get pushed back a little bit. So instead, I wanted to go for something that was a little bit more of a low-hanging fruit, something that's been talked about and discussed quite a bit. So I decided to go with shonen rom-coms. And it's probably not going to be as long as my usual kind of video style, but I still want to get my thoughts out there, even if this is a topic that's been discussed quite a lot. So, hopefully you guys all enjoy this. If you want to keep updated, I'm still incredibly active on Twitter. I'm somewhat active on Hive, and I do use YouTube communities quite a lot to talk to people. And I also use Tumblr. I figured out how to use that again. So, if you want any updates, everything is at Mac Loves Manga. And, be sure to like, share, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell. I want to thank you all for hitting 400 subscribers recently. That's way more than I ever thought I'd get. So, until then, make sure y'all keep on reading, and thanks for watching. See you later.